Welcome, everyone. I'm looking forward to spending most of this next hour with you and hearing from you and getting to hear maybe a bit of your story and certainly hearing your question. And I'll do my best to respond. If you've watched any previous Hangouts, you know that I don't always do a very good job answering your questions, which says something about the high quality of your questions and my limitations as an instructor, I'm sure. But before we get to your questions, I do want to ask Nicholas Janes, who has been part of medical neuroscience and the Duke side. And I want to ask Nick if he's willing to just highlight some of the important deadlines that are upcoming as we conclude this session of medical neuroscience. So Nick, why don't you go ahead and just walk us through some of the highlights that we want everybody to keep in mind.
So hopefully, can everybody hear me? I'm not on a microphone or anything. So
I can hear you.
Okay, cool. So with only a couple of weeks left, as you know, that this is going to be the last session based for our session platform. I believe in April 1st they're going to shut everything off. I believe everything will be read-only, but there won't be any kind of access to any of the quizzes or discussion boards. I believe you still might be able to just watch the videos. But as far as the quizzes and exams, we have set everything to be turned in. It says that the 28th, but it's actually just to be on the safe side, so we have time to run the grades and get the certificates issued before they actually shut the platform down. We ask that you have all of your quizzes done by the 27th, midnight our time. I think we're Eastern Daylight Time now.
Eastern Daylight Time.
Yeah.
Here in the Eastern.
Or is it Eastern Standing Time? So it's always one of those things. But yeah, so just make sure that you get all of your quizzes and exams done prior to that. As far as late days, definitely want to allocate those as thoroughly as possible. The hard deadline, nothing will be able to be turned in after the 28th or at 11:59 p.m. So everything has to be turned in by then, so you can't extend that. So the functional exam and the comprehensive final exam, so those have multiple parts. So if you use a late day for each of those parts, that's going to be one late day for each part. So if say we have 8 late days, if you need to turn in or do a late day for each of those parts, like let's say part 1, if you only have 4 days left, you can only extend 1 part per day. So just be mindful of that. I think that's pretty much it. So just definitely just keep in mind of the late days and the deadlines.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nick. Again, I would only emphasize that it is a bit tricky understanding how late days apply when we come to the end of the course because of the multiple parts of the 2 larger exams. So just please refer to the email that was sent, which is now an announcement on our landing page, our homepage for the course. Okay, so I think we're ready to jump in and talk to some of you. So let's see, I think Pia, you're in first. Is there something you'd like to comment on or ask? Go right ahead. Welcome.
Hi, am I live?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'm enjoying your class from Sacramento, California. And I have a question that has to do with Hebb's postulate and compensation injury. Yes. And I know you like running, and I love running too, and so I'm going to relate this question to running. Okay, so runners seem to have a habit of not dealing with taking rest if you have a little injury. And that can have some pretty bad consequences. And I learned about compensation injuries. So, and I have some first-hand experience with that, unfortunately. So what seems to happen is that when you have a little injury and you really want to get back and you don't really give yourself enough time to recover, then some of your other muscles are going to compensate and take care of that injured tissue, and then your gait's going to be a little off, and then finally you will have some compensation injuries. So I have 2 parts of this question. One, how do muscle groups go offline when you have a compensation injury? How does Hebb's postulate apply? And I'm sure it does apply. And then the second part is can you apply Hebb's postulate to the physical therapy in order to get more and more muscle groups to get engaged again once that happens? So.
Yes, well, thank you for those questions. I've actually thought quite a lot about both aspects of those questions. I'm not sure if you were with us in the Hangout from about a month ago, but I broke a bone in my foot running, okay? And I actually tilted the camera to show everyone the boot that I've been wearing on my foot. So I'm about 3 weeks now removed from having to wear the boot on my foot. And if you've ever worn a rigid external cast like that, you know that that in itself alters gait, let alone the injury itself. And I was amazed. I shouldn't be, but I was. No, actually I should be amazed because the nervous system is a wonderful thing. But I was amazed at how long it took me to restore a normal gait after going back to regular walking shoes from wearing the boot. And what I truly felt was happening is that my nervous system became adapted through mechanisms of Hebbian plasticity to walk in a certain way while wearing a boot. And I had to learn how to walk without the boot. And that wasn't really a matter of undoing that plasticity. It was imposing a new wave of plasticity that would retune my central pattern generators and the rest of the local circuits that are operating in the spinal cord to reestablish normal gait and correct those compensations that I had just learned. So it took me about 10 days or so before I felt like I was walking normally again. Now, I was still walking with pain, and there was still a little bit of a limp because of pain, but this external device and the imposition of an alteration in my pattern of gait, I truly believe was a matter of plasticity. And of course, there's science that suggests that that's the case. So I think your sense that compensation can induce a kind of plasticity within sensory and motor circuits that can have a lasting impact is absolutely on target, which really makes your second question all the more important. Because if one is trying to return to optimal functioning, one has to not only promote the recovery and healing of the injured body tissue, but one also has to retune the nervous system, or really tune it again under the rules of plasticity that we've learned about, Hebbian plasticity and spike timing dependent plasticity. So the real question is, how do we do that? How do we optimize it? Well, there are a variety of principles that are now being explored. And some of those that I guess I would highlight in this context are specificity and repetition. So if we truly want to adapt those circuits that have undergone plastic change to a new state of structure and function, we need to repetitively activate those circuits. Now the challenge is we don't know what is the right dose. Is it, a high level of dosage or a moderate level of dosage, or is it some kind of pattern of dosage that optimizes plasticity and the consolidation of plasticity? My sense is that there's some kind of patterning that would optimize both the acquisition of the synaptic change, but also its consolidation and the structure of the circuits. So we need to know something about the intensity of the rehabilitation, but we also need to know something about the specificity. So synaptic plasticity seems to operate at remarkably local and specific levels within circuits. And so I think if we want to truly optimize function, then we really need to reduce the variance of our repetitions from trial to trial, and then really focus on the quality of the sensory motor experience that comes with the movement. So too often I think we repeat without quality control, which is very much like having a unique pattern of movement each and every trial. And so it's impossible to accrue the level of repetition that might be necessary to optimize plasticity in those situations. So what do you think about that, Paya? Has that been your experience as well?
Uh, yes, indeed. And I have another follow-up question, which is, and I've been thinking about this all through class, that how do you get to the point of long-term depression? So, and what is the mechanism? So, if we're supposed to be getting these unsynchronized action potentials, and this is when something that might happen when you are insisting on compensating for quite some time and muscle groups actually start to go offline. Is that long-term depression? And if so, where are these action potentials coming from? What's the process?
Yeah, so I meant to say this earlier, but I think muscle groups going offline is a bit too extreme. I wouldn't put it quite in those terms. I think it's certainly the case that we may be reorganizing the synergies among muscle groups, and we are modulating the activations and the timing and the sequencing and all of that. But I don't think we are really truly taking a motor neuronal pool offline, so to speak. It's just a matter of modulating their weights of the inputs and the strength of the circuits that govern their output.
Okay, so they're weakened circuits, but they're not actually offline.
They're not actually offline, correct. So, but there very well may be long-term depression as part of the story. So, what is hard to appreciate unless you can put yourself in that sort of cognitive map of the central nervous system is that each neuron is connected to, on average, probably about 2,000 other neurons, something like that, maybe a little less for the spinal cord. So you have to imagine that there are thousands of inputs coming to, let's say, a motor neuron, and only a relatively small fraction of them will be coordinated in their activity and reinforcing at any given time. And so there's always long-term depression happening, just as there's always long-term potentiation happening. So something's being reinforced, something is being depressed. And so as we acquire, let's say, compensations in the early phases of recovery, we're strengthening those circuits that we're implementing the compensation, probably at the expense of those circuits that otherwise were providing us with adaptive movement previously, which is partly the neurobiological picture of what does it look like to develop compensatory movement in the first place. So long-term depression is going to happen as many hundreds, perhaps even thousands of inputs are being reshaped in favor of other hundreds or thousands of inputs that are now being reinforced and made more adaptive. So one of the really interesting bits of basic science about this is that we now have techniques that allow us to watch synapses over time. And it's been remarkable to see how dynamic are the connections between dendritic spines and synaptic inputs. And many of them seem to be exploratory. That is, they're just testing out the possible connections. And so there are new connections that are formed and breaking all the time. And it's that dynamic flux of synaptogenesis that provides a bit of a substratum for long-term potentiation and long-term depression to stabilize adaptive circuits.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks a lot. I guess I'll make one more comment before I go offline, and that has to do with the recovery aspect. I have been going to a wonderful group over at UC Davis Sports Performance Lab, and there they actually do physical therapy a la Hebb's postulate. And I was doing this at the same time as taking your course and talking with them, about some of these concepts. And what they are doing is isolating the muscle groups that are weak. In my case, it's the hip stabilizing muscles. And they're doing exercises that are based on going into a pose that uses that particular weakened muscle and holding it. So you have to build up to holding for at least 60 seconds. And that brings, more and more muscle groups, into action through this, long-term activation process. So that was very apropos, and I just wanted to add that it would be wonderful to see more and more healthcare professional, physical therapists, work, according to this kind of a practice.
Well, I really appreciate that. I don't know if I've made much of a deal of this, but this is my affiliation at Duke. I'm actually in our physical therapy faculty, and so one of the things I do is I teach these principles of neuroscience to our future doctors of physical therapy at Duke University. And we've been talking quite a bit about exactly what you're describing. Next week we're going to do even more as we get a little bit deeper into what for medical neuroscience is Unit 5. But I think that's really the future for physical therapy, is to understand how to take the power of movement and the power of sensory motor experience and use it for therapeutic benefit. And this certainly applies to optimizing human performance and otherwise healthy, intact individuals, but it also very critically will apply to people that have suffered injury or disease of some sort. And that's all of us. We all deal with life in the real world. So I think physical medicine is going to be an even larger component of what healthcare is all about going forward. So I'm glad you had those experiences, and thank you so much for joining us, Pia. And thanks for being in medical neuroscience.
Thank you so much.
Okay, how about if we go next to Paula? Paula, can you hear me? I think your mic is muted, so if you're with us, please unmute your mic.
Can you hear me?
I can, but I've lost sight of you, but I can hear you very, very well.
Okay, that is important for now. Yes.
Okay, go right ahead, Paula.
Okay, my question for you is, for example, you say this was exciting times for the brain, for the research of the brain.
Yes.
And I just haven't heard that from you, but I have heard it a lot of times. So my question is, what do you feel of being part of these amazing times? For example, you're right now a clinician, a professor, and you're being part of this. But I'm just starting my career, and I feel like I'm being falling behind because all the new excitement research and all the things that people has done so far. So what do you feel about?
Well, thank you for that very interesting question. I'll tell you a brief story. When I was a very young graduate student many years ago, I was interested in cardiovascular physiology. And I went to talk to some faculty that I considered to be mentors. And one faculty member who was an immunologist sat me down and he said, the future is in the brain. The future is just not in the heart. Now, of course, that was a very biased thing to say, but I really thought a lot about that, and I hardly knew anything about the brain at the time, but I had a sense that he was right, that the future was about the brain and its impact on all of life and all of society and all of health and healthcare. And I decided that that was going to be the future that I wanted to pursue for myself. I think we are in the process of seeing that future become a reality. I do think there are many domains of science that require human endeavor and activity, so I really don't want to be too chauvinistic and promote neuroscience above all else. In fact, I wonder if maybe social science or environmental science is poised to be the next major intellectual endeavor that will capture the minds and the imaginations of young people around the world. But at least for now, I'm very pleased that neuroscience has been that, particularly in the last 20 years, and it's been just a great privilege to be part of it. And in fact, medical neuroscience is a reflection of my sense of obligation of wanting to give back and to try to help other people who are imagining themselves as part of this 21st century that is going to be marked by enormous discovery when it comes to understanding the brain, the body, and just the wonders of what our brain is capable of achieving. So do you yourself, are you interested in pursuing a career in neuroscience or healthcare or something related to the field of neuroscience?
Really, I want to be a doctor, but taking this course so far is making me like go into a specific side of the medicine. So I'm really interested in taking a neuroscience major. I'm looking for that right now. And that's my second question. What will be your advice for me for pursuing that major?
So I think at the baccalaureate level, there are neuroscience majors available. We've created one here at Duke that I helped to direct. And I think that is a wonderful way to explore the foundations in the natural sciences that you will need, as well as the quantitative sciences, including topics like physics and mathematics and computer science as well. So those are all very important foundations for understanding the brain. But I don't think one has to be a neuroscience major if you're thinking about how to apply yourself and you're still interested in the brain. We have wonderful opportunities to study the brain from other kinds of disciplines, including all of the life sciences and the natural sciences, but even now the social sciences can be an appropriate way to prepare oneself to engage both medicine and the field of neurosciences. So I think you have many, many options. Most roads can lead to the brain, so you can get to the interest that you're developing in the field of neuroscience through many different perspectives, and I would welcome all of that, because that's what it's going to take to understand the brain. Neuroscience, after all, is a confluence of multiple disciplines. It's not just one disciplinary approach. It requires as many approaches as we can gather to understand the totality of brain function. And we know that we're just beginning, and we see only fragments of what the brain is actually capable of doing. So we need young people like yourself, so I would encourage you to pursue your dreams, be it in medicine or in some other field, but I'm very grateful for your interest in the field of neuroscience.
Thank you very much.
So, Paula, where are you?
Colombia.
Colombia. Oh, very
South
nice.
America.
Yes, thank you for joining me. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for answering my question. I appreciate it, really appreciate it.
Okay. All right, let's go next to Anna. You've been waiting very patiently. Thank you for being with us today. Anna, go right ahead. I think your mic is muted, so you need to unmute yourself. I see you, but I don't hear you, Anna. I'm sorry, we don't hear you. There must be a microphone issue on your side. Well,
try turning it off and then back on.
Anna, did you hear that? Could you try turning your microphone off and then on again? Well, let's go to Virginia, and maybe Anna can sort out those technical challenges. Hi, Virginia. You are muted, so please unmute yourself.
Okay. Did that work?
Yes, very, very well.
All right. How are you?
Very well. How about you?
Pretty good. I'm getting a little nostalgic that the class is about to wrap up. I've enjoyed it so much. I can't even begin to tell you how much I'm just grateful that you've put all this effort and brought your humor and personal anecdotes. It's been a really wonderful experience. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's nice of you to say that.
So I have lots and lots of things I'd like to ask you. I'm going to try to condense it down. You mentioned an area of research at one time. I think it's in my notes, right around, I think we were on the motor system, and it was talking about a possible movement-based intervention for autism. Mm-hmm. Does that ring a bell? Is that?
Yes, right, okay. Absolutely.
So, so my background is I was originally a psychology major. I found it to be a bit vague. Went on the pre-med track and ended up going into nursing, and now I have applied to a nurse practitioner program. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping to go into mental health. and I really want to have a research focus, and I'm finding it challenging to come in as a nurse. They seem to be, so we're here in St. Louis, very close to Washington University, and I've reached out to lots of researchers and said, hey, I'd love to get involved in a project. You don't even have to pay me. I just want to be part of moving the ball forward. And really hitting kind of a brick wall with that. But autism does seem to be one area that is sort of open to nursing. Seems to be, an open territory for nursing research, I suppose. And I guess I'm just sort of interested to know, when you made that recommendation that this might be something that somebody could study, could you elaborate on where you were coming from when you made that statement?
Sure. So what I was commenting upon is some evidence, it's not great evidence, but it's out there, that the underlying issue with autism has to do with brain wiring. And there are various reasons to think, based on some imaging studies of the last decade, that there may be actually too much connectivity among certain brain networks in certain stages of development, and then perhaps not enough connectivity at other times. So one system that very well may be affected because of these connectivity challenges is the premotor cortex, and in particular those networks of neurons that have these mirror properties to them. So you recall we talked about mirror motor neurons. There's some evidence that the mirror motor neuron system may not be functioning in a typical way in many young children with autism. So we need to understand that possibility better with more compelling clinical evidence. So right now our ability to assess that is very indirect, so there's a fair amount of controversy about that. But I think it makes a certain amount of sense, because if part of what the mirror motor system is doing is helping us to encode the intention of action on the part of other people that we observe, then one can appreciate why someone on the autism spectrum disorder may have some challenges in social relations if the intentionality of meaning is not clear. So, most of us understand from a very young age the meaning of a parent approaching with arms wide open as if to embrace. But if that movement is not coded in a typical fashion in the brain of someone on the spectrum of autism disorder, then perhaps the meaning of that movement is interpreted more as threat than as embrace. So that's the connection that I see between the mirror motor system and social cognition that's worthy of further research and exploration. So the question then becomes, well, if there is plasticity in the brain, which of course there is, and the underlying condition may be related to the motor system, might physical movement be one way to rehabilitate, or in the case of a young person, habilitate, that is, acquiring the connections and refining them in the first place? Might one be able to achieve that through physical movement? And I think that is a very worthy question of investigation and research. So I'm not aware that this has really been studied, certainly not at any comprehensive level, but I think it raises some really interesting questions about how physical activity, even physical therapy, might be used as a way of intervening in autism. Now, certainly there's lots of motor phenotypes, or lots of movements that we associate with autism spectrum. Everything from a kind of a flapping or flailing of the arms from time to time to these kinds of rhythmic, stereotypical behaviors that seem purposeful, but maybe they're really not purposeful. Maybe for the individual expressing those movements, it's a way of sort of self-shaping the experiences through movement that can impact our sensory motor systems. So long-winded answer, but I actually do think there's a role for studying physical activity as a possible means for intervention. So we need to understand the nature of physical activity in children on the autism spectrum disorder, and then how that might be shaped in a clinically beneficial manner.
Okay. Well, if it's okay, I just had a couple follow-up questions. So some theories I've seen about autism and the brain growing too quickly, or other related disorders such as ADHD. Some have suggested that when there are gross imbalances in the brain, so maybe a great ability in one area and then a big deficit in another. I know I've observed it in my own children, one in particular who has a great aptitude for math and is very clumsy and seems just, a little disconnected from his body. And I was reading this book that was suggesting that you need to have balance between the two hemispheres. And I was trying to reconcile that with what we've learned so far in the course. Do you think that's junk science, or does that kind of make sense to you?
Well, I think any attempt to simplify the complexities of autism spectrum and typical neurodevelopment to a matter of left-right hemispheric balance is probably not a useful simplification. I do think that there may be something to the idea that as circuits are developing and elaborating, they are becoming increasingly specialized, and those specializations can begin to instantiate various kinds of behaviors that, as a society, we may value more or less or reward more or less. And I think that part of the problem here, frankly, at least in the United States, is that we have this canonical view in our educational structures as to what typical development is all about. And so I think we need to expand that space and allow for greater diversity of neural architectures to coexist. Now, there are so many practical issues around education that I don't mean to dismiss, but I just want to recognize that putting all of this into good public policy is a huge challenge for anybody. But I do recognize that there are a diversity of neural architectures, and at the early stages of life, but also at the end of life, I don't think as a society we adequately value that diversity or adequately give space in society for the expression of that diversity. So that diversity involves strengths and weaknesses relative to societal norms. And as a parent myself, and you mentioned your own experience as a parent, we see that in our own children. And some of us see it more or less depending upon the nature of the strength and the weakness. So I think part of our challenge is to optimize the capacity for each individual to flourish in their context, but also to think about that context and challenge it as we may need to when it comes to understanding the norms of human behavior and where those norms are derived in society. So, big controversial issues, but I certainly am grateful for your interest in them, Virginia, and for your willingness to move into this field. Nurse practitioners are an extremely important member of the healthcare team, so I'm grateful for your ability to serve in that way.
Well, thank you so much. If I could ask one last question, I promise this will be the last.
Okay.
I also love to play the guitar. Why do you think that playing music is so good for your brain?
I think that music is one of the most powerful modulators of brain activity. If you were to do a typical functional magnetic resonance imaging experiment and ask, what is the stimulus that seems to capture as much of the brain and then modulate its amplitude of activity, you'll find that music is probably the single most profound modulator of brain function. And it's not just one part of the brain, it's multiple systems throughout the brain. It involves certainly our sensory systems that are engaging with the raw acoustic signals that are present in the environmental cue, but it engages the emotion, it engages the memory. There may be an element, depending upon whether you're performing the music or listening to it passively, that deeply engages the motor system. And of course, many folks have the impulse to move, even with listening to passive music. So I think the motor system is already engaged. So I think there are very few experiences in life that can have that impact on brain function, particularly in the absence of a social context. Now, if we experience music in that social context, that's probably even better. But I think there's just something really powerful about the various elements of temporal processing in terms of rhythm, spectral processing in terms of the tonal aspects of the music, and then the engagement of emotion and memory. It's just a wonderful means to explore the depths of your knowledge of yourself and of others, and to appreciate the way the brain is mediating all of that. It's really fascinating.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, very nice to have you.
Okay.
Okay, so let's turn to Anna. So Anna has submitted a question. So Nick, would you mind leading us through Anna's question?
Dr. White, it's a pleasure for me to be under your tuition for the medical neuroscience course, and it's also a joy to be undertaking the course. Thank you. Right now, I'm a clinical psychology student at the Instituto Tecnológico y de Estudios Superiores de Monterrey, and I am also part of the research and innovation program of the school. In order to get my diploma, I need to take part in some research internships. I am currently interested in taking part or designing one that deals with the neural correlates of concussion, especially one that makes use of no report paradigm. I wanted to ask if you could give me some advice about the research process, and specifically, what is it like to take part on a research that deals with the brain?
Thank you, Anna, for your question. There are many ways that I could take that question, but one possibility is to consider the fact that you are interested in cognitive neuroscience. So one might want to apply that by being engaged in the brain sciences that use human subjects. So one way that you can do that is trying to affiliate with departments of cognitive neuroscience that might exist in your institution, or psychology, and think of various ways in which investigators measure brain function. Typically, that's done through looking at the electrical waves that the brain generates through electroencephalography. One can look at this through more higher tech means that involve methodologies including magnetic resonance imaging that will look at brain structure and function. One can also use lower tech means to try to look at the byproducts of neural activity, including things like the visceral motor state of the body, as might be assessed through measures of blood pressure, heart rate, breathing, and something called the galvanic skin conductance response, which is a measure of autonomic tone in the skin. So there are a variety of methods that can be used to explore the basis of consciousness and the modulations of consciousness. Now, if you're talking about no report paradigms, I think what you mean are those kinds of measures where you're looking for essentially biomarkers of brain state. One can even get into very interesting questions such as exploring individuals who have suffered severe injuries to the brain and are redefining really what does it mean to be in a minimally conscious state. So there are brain imaging methods that are being used for those kinds of studies as well. So I'm speaking very generally, I'm sorry, but hopefully if you can make your question perhaps a bit more specific, I can be more helpful to you. But for now, I think I would say there are really wonderful tools to explore the nature of human consciousness and how it relates to the brain. But again, I would do so with a great deal of humility, knowing that we have much to learn from other disciplines and other traditions, including philosophy, all of the humanities, literature in particular, but even some domains of human inquiry that neuroscientists are much less comfortable with, including, for example, various religious traditions and other ways of trying to gain insight into the nature of the human mind. So I think all of that is now opening up and becoming much more widely embraced by the brain science community. So I would encourage your interest and just wish you all the best as you pursue them. Okay, I think we'll go next to Idris. Are you there? You're presently muted, so could you please unmute your mic?
I'm there, Professor.
Yes, I hear you. Thank you. Welcome.
Okay. First of all, I would like to really thank you for the course and the opportunity you are giving us to ask our questions. I have one or two questions. I would really like you to give me some clear answers to them.
Okay.
I'm currently a medical student in Cameroon, and I'm very interested in neurosurgery and neurosciences. Now, my first question concerns children in the hospital that have hydrocephalus. Usually, they perform a derivation.
Yes.
And that derivation, they use the material they use crosses the cortex of the brain. But as soon as the child comes back after the operation, there is no deficit. So I usually think about it as if there are some places in the brain, in the cortex, that have no use, or that can be just removed and nothing happens. Exactly as in the comprehensive exam, there was a case where there was complete part of the temporal lobe was removed from that patient.
Yes.
And the deficit was not huge. I want to really know, are there places on the cortex that can be removed and completely nothing happens to the person?
Thank you for your question, Idris. Before I answer, Nick, can I ask you to mute your mic? I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. Thank you. So I'm going to grab my brain model as I answer your question because it might come in handy. So as a neurobiologist, rather than a neurosurgeon, I would say that there is no part of this organ that is useless, and no part of this organ that does not contribute to function. Now, it is certainly the case that there are certain parts of this organ that, if damaged, will lead to significant morbidity, significant functional deficit. But I guess I would encourage you to keep in mind that our means for assessing the function of individuals that most clinicians, frankly, do not know as people. That capacity to assess function is very limited. So, for example, if one were to have a stroke involving the middle cerebral artery in the left hemisphere, or an injury to the left hemisphere, you would be thinking that this person may have significant communication issues because of the possible injury to Broca's area in the inferior left frontal gyrus, or possibly to damage to Wernicke's area somewhere in the lateral temporal neocortex. So we have great ways, obviously, to know whether a person has suffered those kinds of injuries that lead to aphasia. But what about the right hemisphere? So if a person had that kind of injury in the right hemisphere, for many clinicians, that would be a hidden kind of injury because we may not pick up on the more subtle changes that would be of a real-world impact for that person. That person's social relations may be significantly impacted if they have a loss of emotional processing within language. We call that prosody. So the clinician, the neurosurgeon or the neurologist or the psychiatrist or the family medicine physician may be much less aware of the real-world impacts of right hemispheric injury in the language regions compared to the left hemisphere. So that's just one example. Now, there's a phrase that I'm sure you've heard, because I hear it a lot in neurosurgery here in the United States, and the phrase is eloquent cortex. So what the neurosurgeons want to do is to preserve eloquent cortex. As a neurobiologist, I take offense to that term. I hope you don't mind me saying that, Idris, because I consider the entire cortex to be eloquent, not just those that we use to make speech and to move our bodies, but the entire organ. Now, it certainly is the case that functional morbidity is not evenly distributed throughout the brain, and there may be some redundancies built into some of the circuits, particularly those of the prefrontal region of the frontal lobe, which is why if one is implanting a shunt through the foramen of Monroe, you may choose to penetrate through, let's say, the middle frontal gyrus. It would be a horrible mistake to try to approach with that shunt going through the precentral gyrus, because every neurosurgeon knows that you don't want to leave your patient hemiparetic, which would be possible if you go through the prefrontal or the precentral gyrus. But if you have a small surgical lesion of the middle frontal gyrus, it might be subclinical. So I guess what I would say is that I would affirm your sense as a neurosurgeon that not all cortex is subject to the same consequence of morbidity. However, I would encourage you to think about the difference between morbidity, which is really a clinical assessment of function, and the true function of the brain, which is still largely unknown. Okay, so there's still so much that we don't understand that might be important. So, this part of the brain here, the orbital prefrontal cortex, we know has a lot to do with one's decision value or one's moral judgment. Moral judgment is typically not assessed in the clinical setting, right? But that might be the difference between someone living successfully in their community or not. So there are structures in the brain that I think we should definitely be more concerned with in terms of what we do neurosurgically. But of course, as a neurosurgeon, you're also working with the patient and helping the patient achieve their own personal goals. And maybe their goal is to preserve language function, and that might be more important than preserving motor function. So you have to make those kinds of decisions.
Okay. Professor, there's this speculation. I don't know whether it's really a speculation, but vaccines, do vaccines cause autism? Are there neurobiological evidence, whether true or false, some vaccines cause autism?
This is a very important question, and it has been studied by international groups of scientists, and there is a very strong conclusion. Now, the answer is that it is false. Vaccines do not cause autism. Now, that doesn't mean that there may not be immunological triggers that can affect the developing brain. That may be the case. We don't know the biology well enough to say that, but we do know that vaccines are not a cause of autism, and I can say that with the confidence of recent international scientific studies.
Okay, Professor, one last question. I want concerning the eye. Why is the eye? Can we trust our eye? Because this course I learned a lot about the eye, and the eye is really a very fascinating organ. I want to know whether we can really trust the eye, because it can be full very, very, in fact, a lot of times. Can we trust it?
Yes, I would say we can trust it no more than we can trust any other sensory system. And it's quite interesting that you're asking that question, Idris, because there's been a very interesting debate in the vision science community for the last 2 weeks. I'm part of a listserv called Color Vision Network, and it's an international network of vision scientists. And there's been an intense debate about the meaning of illusion. So I'll restate your question, if I may. So the debate has been, what is an illusion? And how can we differentiate illusion from perception? And most of the vision science community would say that all of perception is illusion. Okay? And so what we mean by that is that perception is generated by the brain. And we have a perceptual experience of the world that can be validated through our interactions with it, but sometimes it surprises us when it's not validated. You know, we think we're looking at the face of a friend as they approach us, and then they get a little closer and we realize, oh no, that's not the person that I thought they were. That's just one example that happens to me almost every day. But really, our perception is created by the brain. And when you think about vision, you know, the world is simply these objects out there that are reflecting photons, and those photons are entering our eyes and striking our retinas and generating neural signals, and then our brain creates this beautiful world that we see. But if we could see that world the way that it actually exists without a brain, I know that's not possible, but if we could, I think we would be hugely disappointed. For one thing, we only see a very small band of the actual energy that's emanating from the world around us. The visual portion of the electromagnetic spectrum is very small compared to the full range of energy that's out there. But obviously, this is the world in which we live, and our brain and our sensory organs have been tuned to operate in that world. So we think we're seeing the important information that's meaningful for life on this planet, but we're missing the vast majority of that information. And that's probably a very good thing, because our mind could not process it all, right? If we could attend to all of the information that is processing in through our sensory organs and through our spinal cord and entering our thalamus, we probably would lose our mind, because the information stream would be overwhelming.
Okay. Professor, maybe I would like to ask you one personal question. I would like to do a neurosurgery residency after medical degree, and before that, I would like to first of all have a PhD in neurosciences. And usually, when they talk about it, it seems as in the US is very restrained. The competition is very huge.
Yes.
For international medical graduates, after following all the EC, all the USMLE stuff, and all the other roads you have to follow, is your program, your medical school, and PhD degree accept, or are they friendly to international medical graduates? Or because I would really love to have mentors like you, your team, and Duke at Duke University.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your interest in that. It is challenging for foreign medical graduates to enter residency in the United States, largely because of how the residency programs are financed. They typically are financed by money that's derived from our federal government, and there are restrictions on who's eligible to receive those funds. So there's a component of the problem that foreign medical graduates face in the United States that relates to the funding of residency education. It's not impossible, but it's very, very challenging. But I would just suggest that there may be other ways to receive the benefit of the kind of education that might be experienced here at a university like Duke. I don't know your circumstance or what you're interested in doing with your medical education, but we have a team of neurosurgeons at Duke who've begun residency education in neurosurgery in Uganda. And so this is a wonderful new initiative that is that has a vision of educating a cadre of neurosurgeons that are based in Africa to practice in Africa. And there is now a neurosurgery program where those residents, they train in Uganda, but they also come to Duke, and they train at Duke. So that might be something to look into as you think more broadly about extending your medical education at the residency level. But I say that just to illustrate that there are various international partnerships that might make it easier for a foreign educated physician to connect with a U.S.-based school of medicine.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your team.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. And so let's go to Grace. Grace, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for being with you. It hasn't been easy joining the conversation, so I'm really. It's a pity that I didn't hear all the questions because I was so occupied trying to enter the conversation. However, it's good that get the chance on YouTube. Now that we're finishing or wrapping up the course and getting close to the finish line, I want to thank you once again, you and your staff. It's been an amazing staff. So a very special thank you to you and Ellen Voss and the rest of the team. You've been very helpful, and I've gained so much knowledge from this course that I can't even compare it to all of the other courses. I study human life science engineering in Denmark, and none of the courses have been so giving and inspiring, and the setup with the structure and how you teach us, it's been tremendous. So, and actually last time we had the Hangout, I followed your tip to one of the our fellow students, and I actually took contact with a neuroscientist the day after, and today I had a meeting with him, a brain scientist here in Denmark, and I'm going to enter some research, some neuroscience research by this fall, and it's I'm gonna imply it in my study. So it's so exciting, and I'm gonna work with hippocampal injuries and the rehabilitation after those brain injuries. So I'm just so thrilled and excited about living out my dream, and I'm getting more and more close to my goal. All thanks to you. I thought this would be like 10 years out in the future for me, and now I'm actually doing it. So it's I'm really thankful.
Well, thank you so much, Grace, for participating in the course and for sharing that. It's really extremely encouraging and gratifying to me. I know I only have a very small piece of this. Most of it is you, and it's your energy and your passion and your vision for who you want to be. So I would only encourage you to pursue those dreams and make the most of your opportunity to get involved in the research. I trust that you do that. But thank you so much for
staying. You led me on, and I'm so thrilled. Thanks to you and your staff. However, my question today, like I said last time, I have so many questions, but I've been curious about OCD and where that is where is that to be found, or what can be done, or what do we know about OCD today when it comes to the clinical aspect of it?
Yeah, good question. So we are learning more about that. We think that obsessive compulsive disorder has something to do with a dysregulation of a network that involves the medial part of the prefrontal cortex, perhaps specifically the part that sits right below the genu of the corpus callosum. I'm going to grab my brain model again.
I'm just going to tell you right away. What's so amazing about this course, when I started out and you pointed out all the parts of the brain, that's one of the things I've loved about the course, that we got to see real brain specimens. But now, when I see those parts of the brain, I can point them out and tell what they are, and it's amazing, because in the beginning I was like, how can you see that? It's all one mass.
Right. Well, I'm glad that you've acquired such strong proficiencies there. Okay, so here's the orbital and medial part of the prefrontal cortex, and right below the genu of the corpus callosum is a part of the cingulate gyrus that we call the subgenual area. This is a part of the brain that seems to be very important in the value that we put on our decisions that we make in life. And this part of the brain seems to be involved with OCD. Now, I don't think it's the whole story to localize OCD to that part of the brain. I think that one of the hallmarks of obsessive-compulsive disorder is both the obsession but also the behavior itself. And so we suspect that there may be some dysfunction in the basal ganglia that relates to this part of the brain. So, for example, we are increasingly beginning to hypothesize that habits and repetitive behaviors might actually be stored and selected as information flows through the basal ganglia. So the current thinking about this, as best I understand it, is that the obsessive part of OCD may relate to this medial prefrontal cortex, but the behaviors themselves may relate to some kind of selection that is enforcing the habit or the repetitiveness of the behavior, and that may reside more at the level of the basal ganglia. But these two parts of the nervous system, of course, are interconnected. The basal ganglia influences the way the thalamus engages the cortex, and so there may be a circuit that runs particularly through this orbital and medial part of the prefrontal cortex that is affecting our motivation for stereotypical and repetitive behavior. So, complex answer, but it is suggesting that maybe there are some areas that we can target with directed interventions, such as deep brain stimulation. So there are some clinical trials using deep brain stimulation targeting this region of the anterior cingulate as a means of treating obsessive-compulsive disorder. And it may be that what's going on there is that we're modulating not so much the behavior, but the obsession for expressing the behavior by altering our value that we place on the performance of that behavior.
Yeah, because I have an acquaintance or a close relative. I hope that person wouldn't be offended by me saying that. But she's just recently told by the doctor that she has obsessive compulsive behavior or disorder, and it's just very frustrating to watch that person. I have that clinical curiosity to it, but it's also it's very frustrating to watch a person and don't know how to like approach the problem. And right. I've been trying to search on it and find out what's known about OCD, because I think it's very weird that you can't that the person is so obsessed and they can't cross that line. And that's right. The brain, that is something like either a chemical thing going on in the brain, or that they're just so obsessed with the thought that they can't cross the line and get over it, because like you watch them, they can't cross the doorstep, and it's like, how can that be so like it's difficult to explain, but it's so consolidated in the brain or their perception of the world that it's really dangerous to the person to cross that doorstep, for instance. And I just, I'm just curious about how does that happen in the brain? How can the brain like get stuck on that thought and just get stuck?
Well, it really is a testimony to the power of motivation. So normally we think of motivated behavior as being a adaptive aspect of cognition and you know, how we express ourselves in life. But if that motivation drives us to destructive behaviors or to non-productive behaviors in the case of repetition or habit, then it can be very, very difficult to overcome. It's not a lack of information, right? So it's not like you could just explain this to your friend and her behavior will change. It's not a matter of gathering information. It really is a matter of trying to target the source of these motivational signals, wherever they're arising in the brain. And again, we think it may be coming from the ventral part of the basal ganglia and the medial part of the prefrontal cortex.
However, thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us, Grace. I think we're a few minutes over the time we had allocated to this, so we should probably wrap things up. Nick, do you have anything? that you need to say before we conclude the Hangout for today?
No, not really. Just a reminder that make sure that you get your late days allocated accordingly. Just keep note of the last day of class, and because Coursera is shutting everything down, we probably won't have a whole lot of time to address any kind of concerns related. So basically on the 28th, we've got to run the grades as quickly as possible and give them time to get everything issued so they can get your certificates if you paid for it and everything out in time. So that's it.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for being here, and thank you most of all for your great efforts throughout medical neuroscience, and I wish you all the best as you approach the final week and a half of the course. So I look forward to a successful conclusion for each of you. And I hope to hear some of your stories after the course concludes. So please do continue to engage in our community through one means or another. So until next time, thank you so much, and best wishes for continued success.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay. Bye-bye.